The fog makes the airport look like an aquarium. The white veil swallows the contours. The sounds become muffled, and the range is a number on the scoreboard, not a picture behind the glass. The Boeing 737 is heading along the glide path towards the East Midlands. The course is aligned. The speeds are stabilized. The flaps are in the right positions. Two independent autopilots keep the aircraft on the radio lines as confidently as the blade holds the cutting line. In the cabin, there is a strict calm of procedures. Under 600, confirmation, 500, synchronous response. And when everything seemed to work out perfectly, there was a phrase on the air that shouldn't be here. They told you that you shouldn't sit down. According to your decision, you should go to the second round. In flight, precision is oxygen. Any addition of uncertainty is like sand in a bearing. On the one hand, there is the slender geometry of the Cat 3 ILS, the localizer, the glide path, the lighthouses, the rows of lights, more precisely than a ruler in the drawing. On the other hand, a phrase without a clear command, a half agreement, half lock at the busiest moment. Flying is math, but radio communication is language. When language fails, the numbers start to melt. The contrast is perfect automation against human ambiguity. In such seconds, the crew's brain works in the tunnel mode. The critical parameters in focus are altitude, heading, speed, thrust mode, autopilot status, and the rest is overshadowed. Pressing the right button is a simple motor skill, honed over hundreds of hours like a musician's. But under load, even a familiar click can become someone else's. The hand reaches out to clarify the landing permit, and instead of the broadcast button, a shutdown fungus gets under the thumb. The autopilot sound is sharp, cutting, like the crackle of a broken string. Automatic becomes manual in a fraction of a second, and the same fraction starts to cost too much. Aviation loves symmetry. Two automation channels, so that one ensures the other. Two radio stations, so that one can carry if the other is wheezing. Two pairs of eyes, so that one would notice what the other had missed. But the symmetry crumbles from one inappropriate word and one wrong touch. And if the electronics are built in such a way that they fail predictably, then a person under fire begins to think in the language of instincts. Return the machine, catch up with the line, make it in time, instead of one sure thing, we're leaving. This is the paradox of flight. Iron emotionlessly and accurately follows logic, and people are masters of adaptation, but they pay for it with the risk of taking a step in the wrong direction when there is more stopwatch than time. There is a white silence outside. Inside is a pure geometry of instruments. Heading diameter, intersection point, VREF, vertical velocity, in neat numbers. Everything is almost perfect. Almost. An inconspicuous deviation along the glide path is just 1 point up. The course is a hair to the left. It's like listening to an orchestra where one violin barely misses a note. The audience won't notice, the conductor will flinch. Both should be conductors in the cockpit. One is on the instruments, the other is on automation and visual control. But now everyone has their own micro scene. The left, hand chair is fighting for the return of the machine gun. The right, hand one is observing and trying to convey the deviation in a shorter way than the language allows under stress. Category 3 lights are already ready from below out of the fog, like underwater road signs. A central line, longitudinal bars, a transverse bar strip in the touch zone. They are designed for blind precision. But technology does not save you from the human pause. And so two worlds collide. The strict world of ILS, where plus or minus 1 point is the command leave, and the living world of radio, where a half sentence can sound like continue. One extra phrase, one wrong click, and the perfect fit begins to melt like frost under a spotlight. To understand how this is possible, you need to go beyond these very seconds and consider the entire context, where every little thing is a brick in the wall of events. Before this finale, There were hours of operation contrary to biology in that very window of circadian decline when the body asks for warmth and silence, and the cabin gives numbers and solutions. Before that, there were careful steps on paper maps where East Midlands is hidden under Nottingham, and every unnecessary movement is a minus of attention. Before that, there were fuel calculations as a reserve of time for thoughtfulness. Everything that seemed like a safety net suddenly became a rope bridge over a precipice. You can walk, but the step must be precise. Aviation is always based on oppositions. Automation versus manual piloting. Simple checklists versus complex reality. The radio guide is a voice, not a number, against the ideal mathematics of the race. And if we are waiting for clarity in winter, then clarity here is just a fog. It is honest, it just exists. The voice on the air turned out to be unclear. This is what makes the story important. The technology was not mistaken. The systems worked according to the textbook, and the human turned out to be the unknown in the equation. Imagine a clean line on a glide path, like a rope stretched between the sky and a concrete strip. On this tightrope, the person walking should only look at the steps. Any phrase from the outside, even a friendly one, can disrupt the rhythm. That's exactly what happened. A phrase that wasn't dangerous in content became dangerous in time. And when the refined mode clicked in my brain, my finger did what it shouldn't have done. It turned off what was holding the ship together. Here, every detail is like a tooth in a gear. The minuscule backlash on one wheel creates vibration throughout the mechanism. But a story about an airplane is always a story about the people in it. Who are they, the two in the dark cabin, who kept this car in the right numbers all night and brought it to the point where one sound changed everything? What do they have behind them? Hours in the simulator, retraining in the left chair, a short day's rest in which the body asked for sleep, and the clock showed takeoff in 6? What decisions did they make in advance? Add tons of fuel against the chance of clear skies. Choose backup airfields where automation is stronger than fog. To answer, we need to get out of the milky veil of the final course and return to the beginning of their shift, to where future seconds crystallize, where technology and people are still in balance, and where everything really started as an ordinary working night. Many hours before the fog turned England into a milk trap, it all started in Belgium. At dawn, when the sun had not yet broken through the dense gray haze over Liege, two pilots approached the parking lot, where an old but reliable Boeing 737-300 was dozing under the hum of auxiliary units. The metal body with a slight matte reflection of the spotlights looked tired but serviceable, like a workhorse that had seen a lot and was ready to go on shift again. The car was 19 years old. She started life as a passenger liner, carrying tourists and business travelers, and now her salon is a world of containers, slings, and packages. There are only 2 people on board, and if the plane underwent night maintenance and was ready for operation, then the crew was not quite there. Their schedule, typical for cargo aviation, was set against the natural rhythm of the body. The captain, a 42-year-old Belgian who recently moved to the left-hand seat, completed his previous day not in Belgium, but in Istanbul. There, in a hotel room with thick curtains, he tried to sleep during the day, knowing that his flight was in the evening. Technically, I rested for more than 12 hours. Everything is according to the norms. In fact, he slept in spurts for 2 or 3 hours, with awakenings when the body needed light and the brain needed sleep. This is called a circadian phase shift, when biology lives on one schedule and you live on an airplane schedule. His first officer, a 35-year-old, also from Belgium, started his shift in Vienna. He had a longer rest, 16 hours, and he really managed to recover. But if the captain's experience was measured in 4,000 flight hours, then the co-pilot had only about 1,500 of them. Almost everything is on the 737, but without the depth of those situations that make the pilot intuitive. Together, They formed what airlines call a young crew, not inexperienced, but those who still lack a well-honed mutual instinct when one thinks for two and the other feels the slightest shift in the partner's voice. Their day started like hundreds of others. The cabin is filled with cold metal and the smell of ozone from electronics. He holds the pre-flight documentation in his hands, and the weather report is on the dispatcher screen. Clear skies over London, light wind, but the TAF line holds the attention. 30% chance of fog and visibility less than 2,000 meters. 30% isn't a disaster, but it's enough to make you think. The captain makes a decision. Add 2 tons of fuel to the planned 5.5. This is not a whim, but an insurance policy against unpredictability. Extra kerosene gives you freedom, the opportunity to wait, go on a second lap, fly to an alternate airfield. In aviation, fuel is not only energy, but also time for reflection. And this solution is the first in a chain where every logical detail will then form into a complex pattern of randomness. On the radar screens, everything looks smooth, but the crew already knows that London may not meet them at dawn, but with a wall of white light. Nevertheless, everything is on schedule. At 5 a.m. local time, the reporting mark, doors are closed, containers are secured, refueling is completed. 7.5 tons of fuel in the wings is just enough to fly, think, and if necessary, take off again. When the liner rolls along the taxiway, visibility is only a kilometer. The lane ahead is not completely visible, only the first half of it. The captain holds the steering wheel with one hand and fixes the axis on the line of glowing lights with the other. The radio is overloaded with short phrases. Cleared for takeoff, runway 23 left. A push, an acceleration, a slight vibration, and 50 tons of metal turn into a stream of air and numbers. The landing gear goes up, the thrust stabilizes, and they penetrate the cloud layer, where the gray turns into pure white. The sun is rising, but the crew does not have until dawn. There is only an hour of the route ahead, which means that the descent will begin almost immediately. At this stage, everything is under control. Radio communication is stable. The waypoint by point is marked by automation. But it is in this quiet phase that future problems are laid. One document that the pilots reviewed before takeoff was the NOTAM, a summary of notifications. There are hundreds of lines about temporary changes. The lights of RWI-23 are limited, repair of the localizer, decrease in the accuracy of beacons. And one line that seems unimportant now, but will later become the key. The ILS at Stansted is temporarily out of service. ILS is like an invisible trajectory of light. The aircraft reads the radio beams that guide it exactly in the axis and along the glide path, literally before touching down. When this system does not work, there is an alternative option, SFRA, surveillance radar approach. There is no automation in it, but there is a human dispatcher who guides the plane along the course with words. Turn 5 degrees to the right. Drop to 3,000. Hold. This approach requires concentration, precision, and perfect understanding between the crew and the ground. And although the procedure is absolutely safe, it is more complicated, requires more time, more fuel, and most importantly, it does not forgive fatigue. The captain notes this in his mind. If the fog at Stansted increases, they will have to carry out the SRRA. This means that at night, against the background of biological decline, with limited visibility and without the usual radio beams. So far, this is just a hypothetical complexity, but any hypothetical in aviation tends to become reality. The plane is flying at an altitude of 24,000 feet. The autopilots are steadily heading, and the conversation in the cockpit is short and businesslike. The first officer updates the weather information, listens to Stansted's ATIS. Everything is fine there so far, 6 kilometers of visibility. However, a few minutes later, there is a new summary. The fog is intensifying and visibility drops to 1,000 meters. And this is already below the acceptable minimum for the SRRA. They have a choice: to stay in the waiting area and hope that the sun will dispel the fog, or go to an alternate airfield. And that's where the invisible fatigue factor comes into play. Decisions are made not with cold precision, but with faith and we'll wait a little longer. The captain decides to stay in the holding area. Formally, it is logical. The sun is rising. The fog should go away. In fact, it's an intuition mixed with a desire not to give up the position too early. After all, everything may be about to become clear. The plane enters the waiting circle above the BLRUL point at an altitude of 6,000 feet. At this time, the sky over England turns into the mother-of-pearl tones of dawn. Below, a milky veil; above, silence. And it is here, in this fragile silence, that tension builds. Because everything is still under control, but already on the verge of endurance. There's enough fuel for 40 minutes of waiting. The company does not respond to requests, and every minute leads to the next. This is what the beginning looks like. Outwardly calm, mathematically verified, but underneath there's a layer of human fatigue, like thin ice above water. And when the sun begins to burn through the fog, it will become clear that this ice has already begun to crack. At an altitude of 6,000 feet, above a dense carpet of clouds, the plane goes in a waiting circle. The autopilot confidently holds the turning radius. The radio station transmits short instructions from the Essex radar, and behind the glass, there's the same white silence. It's quiet in the cabin, but it's the kind of silence where every sound has weight. Fans, the rustle of the checklist, the quiet crackle of radio communication. Everything adds up to the soundtrack of waiting. The captain glances at the remaining fuel, about 5 tons, which is enough to circle the fog for another half hour. But every minute of waiting makes math less and less comfortable. On the screen of the ACAR system, a text communication channel with the airline, a message flashes. Communication with the office is impossible. They are waiting for instructions about an alternate airfield, but the answer does not come. But everything was logical in their plans. If not Stansted, then the nearest options are Liverpool or the East Midlands. 2 points with lanes where precise ILS systems work, which means that landing is possible even in conditions of zero visibility. The situation is simple, but there is already a contrast between theory and practice. On paper, everything is predictable. There is a reserve, there is an alternative, there is time. Everything is shaky in the sky. Fog doesn't follow schedules. It can dissipate in 10 minutes, or it can hang for hours. And so the crew finds themselves in a psychological trap between a rational and an emotional choice. The rational one says, let's go to the backup. The emotional one whispers, wait a little longer. It's going to get better now. The captain decides to stay. He has a logic. The sun is rising, the air is warming up, which means the fog must go away. That's how physics works. But physics does not know about human hope. And so, 15 minutes, 20 minutes pass. The dispatcher again transmits new weather data. Runway visual range 350 meters. Visibility is falling, not rising. Instead of dawn, there's a thickening white haze. There was a slight nervousness in the cockpit, but no panic. Fatigue makes emotions deaf. Everything passes through the filter of monotony. The captain checks the remaining fuel, another 35 minutes to the minimum, after which you need to leave. He asks the first officer to check the weather at alternate airports. 2 minutes later, a response arrives from the dispatcher. In the East Midlands, visibility is 2,000 meters, clouds at 300 feet. And in Liverpool, it's clear there, more than 10 kilometers light wind. The contrast is sharp. One airfield is logistically convenient, but with a low cloud ceiling. The other one is a little far away, but the sky is clear. The company finally responds through an intermediary, a ground agent. Their choice is the East Midlands. This is easier for the route, for subsequent unloading, and for the schedule. This solution looks businesslike, but it throws up another challenge for the crew. An automatic landing of Category IA awaits them, a rare mode that requires perfect coordination between the two pilots and the aircraft systems. These landings are like surgical operations. They cannot be done automatically, despite the fact that they are done by automation. Everything must be prepared. Both autopilots, both radios on the ILS frequency, checking the alignment of the courses and angles of the glide path, and being prepared for the fact that nothing will be visible in the windows until the last second. The captain remembers the last time he performed such a landing. 4 months ago, but for the first officer, only in the simulator. And again, the opposition. The technology is extremely accurate, and the human experience is shaky. Autopilot is able to bring an airplane to the ground without human intervention, but requires a person to trust the machine, not to interfere with it, not to interfere when the system is doing what it should. This is the most difficult thing for a pilot to let go of control, especially when nothing is visible from the outside. The decision has been made. East Midlands. The plane leaves the circle, climbs to 10,000 feet, and heads northwest. At this point, when the router rebuilds the path, another micro-complication appears, almost comical, but ultimately important. The first officer is looking for airport schematics to prepare the entry. Paper cards are the 2006 standard. He opens the section with the letter East Midlands, but it's empty. The airport is listed under the old name, Nottingham East Midlands. The discrepancy is trivial, but right now, every second is important. He flips through the pages, searches irritably, and loses a couple of minutes and some of his attention. Commands from the London Air Traffic Controller are already beginning to be heard below. Flight 325, turn right heading 330, descend to flight level 80. The captain is driving, the officer is still looking for the right circuit. It's like trying to find a map in the navigator when you've already taken a wrong turn. Nothing critical, but psychophysiologically it eats up the resource of attention, the very brain reserve that can save at a critical moment. After a few minutes, the card was finally found. They're briefing the approach. ILS on lane 27, Category IA. Minimum visibility, 200 meters. This means that even if only the silhouette of the lanterns is visible from the cockpit, the landing can be completed. The autopilot will do everything. You just need to control, avoid deviations, and confirm a touch. On paper, it's simple. In reality, it's an instant chain of reactions and checks, where you can't make a mistake even in intonation. The plane is heading towards the entry point to the East Midlands area. At an altitude of 8,000 feet, the first message from the approach, runway 27, Cat 3 lights operational. The lighting is working. The system is ready to receive. That sounds encouraging. After an hour of uncertainty, the crew finally has a specific task: to conduct an accurate automatic approach in fog conditions. The captain turns on the second autopilot for backup. The two systems are now connected in one logical chain that will hold the aircraft on its axis and vertically. The radios are tuned to the ILS frequency, and the beacon frequency is embedded in both receivers. Everything looks perfect. The cabin breathes numbers. The altitude is 3,000 feet. The speed is 140 knots. The glide path is caught. The autopilots are synchronized. But behind this perfect order lies the downside: fatigue. This condition does not scream, does not manifest itself in panic. It just makes the brain slower by a second. And in the sky, a second is an eternity. Right now, when everything seems to be under control, that barely noticeable crack in concentration is being laid, which will later turn into a chain reaction. Outside, there's milk again. No horizon line. No shadows. Only the instruments. The aircraft is ready for a perfect approach, and the crew is ready for a perfect landing. But while the automation is driving flawlessly, The two people are already beginning to struggle with their own limits. Between trust and doubt. Between everything is according to plan and something is wrong. As the Boeing 737 slowly descended through milky layers of clouds, the dispatcher announced a short, almost matter-of-fact phrase. Runway 27, cleared for ILS Cat 3 approach. This phrase sounds like music to the ears of any pilot because there is order in it. No improvisations, no verbal cues from the ground. The radio signals themselves will draw an ideal trajectory all the way to the strip. In theory, the accuracy is within a meter. In reality, it's a subtle psychological game between a machine, a person you need to trust, and a person who is more used to controlling. The captain, sitting in the left seat, checked the readings. The frequency of the beacon is 110.30. The course of the strip is 270 degrees. Everything matches. The first officer duplicates the settings on his console, confirms localizer alive. There are green symbols, lines, and dots on the screen. The plane is coming on course. Below them is an English field hidden under a gray layer of moisture. They don't see anything, but they feel everything. Each number in the panel is their only connection to the world. Now, the cabin resembles a mathematical laboratory. Everything is extremely accurate. Altitude hold, glide slope armed, approach mode active. It sounds like a set of cold terms, but in reality, it's like a score that an orchestra of machines is ready to play without mistakes. But this is where the human context begins, which automation does not know how to do. Category IIA is an almost blind landing. The plane may touch the ground when the pilots see only a faint flicker of lights below. But for the system to work, everything must be perfect. 2 working autopilots, 2 channels of radio beacons, and most importantly, silence on the air. Not a single superfluous word, because every word can distract attention, disrupt the rhythm, and introduce doubt. And when everything is stabilized, that same cold contrast sounds in the cockpit. The dispatcher's voice, unrelated to management. TNT 325. I've been instructed that you are not to land here from your operations authority. At your discretion, you may go around. The phrase sounds calm, almost polite, but it's like a piece of ice in a hot metal. It causes instant tension. What does it mean? Who is instructed? Why is may go around like a permission, not an order? The first officer does not understand the meaning under stress. English is not his native language. The phrase is long, multi-part, and the brain, working in overload mode, captures only go around. The captain understands more, but not everything. He knows that any ambiguity in the message must be clarified, and he reaches for the microphone button to ask directly. A click, the wrong one. His finger lands not on the PTT, push to talk, but on the autopilot shutdown button. An alarming, cutting sound is heard in the cabin, a characteristic disconnect signal. It's always sudden, even if you're ready for it. It was as if an invisible hand had pulled the assistant away, leaving the man alone with the car. Both autopilot systems are turned off. The plane remains in the air, but now it is guided only by hands. And there was no lane or horizon ahead. There's only fog and a blinking lamp on the panel. The captain is trying to return the machine gun. He turns on the first channel, and it works. Enables the second one. The first one is disabled. Switches back, the same story. No system wants to work in pairs below 800 feet, and the computer simply refuses to accept the command. But at this moment, a person does not yet realize the whole logic of automation. He acts out of habit. Turn it back on, return it as it was. The first officer sees how the inscription CMD on the screen flashes and goes out, as the plane barely noticeably goes up the glide path. One division is 1 point high. He speaks briefly, as he was taught. 1 dot high. The captain is silent, focused on the panel, trying to activate the system again. The officer repeats, this time in French, instinctively, in a language where the key sounds stronger. Un point. There is no answer, only a short crackle of communication and a measured breathing of the turbines. They are already at an altitude of about 500 feet. At this stage, any deviations from the glide path should lead to a second lap. It's written in the procedures, but the procedures are written in calm conditions. Here, too, there's pressure, fatigue, noise, and the very doubt that makes everyone wait for confirmation from the other. At this moment, the EGPWS system, the Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning System, emits the very voice that the pilots do not want to hear. Terrain, terrain, pull up. The captain looks up, and all he sees is green. No strip lights, no concrete. Green, dense, uniform. Earth. Instinct is stronger than procedure. He pulls the steering wheel towards himself, gives maximum thrust. The turbines roar. The plane goes up, but it's too late. The impact occurs sideways, at a speed of about 140 knots. The right landing gear comes off, as if it has been snapped. The plane hits the ground, the fuselage shudders. The automation goes off for a split second, then returns. The plane is in the sky again. From the outside, it seems like just a hard landing, but inside the cabin, everything is upside down. Shock overload, about 4G, vibration. There are a lot of warnings on the panel. High press A low. Flap ASYM. Gear unsafe. They took off, but now it's not the same plane that it was a minute ago. The right rack is torn off. Hydraulic system A is lost, which means that the brakes on one side, spoilers, part of the rudders and flap controls are not working. The right console is damaged. One of the hydraulic pumps is lost, and the right engine has scratches from touching the ground. There is instant chaos in the cabin. Not hysteria, but an abundance of information. At such moments, pilots say briefly, "Fly the aircraft." It's not just an expression, it's a philosophy. First, keep in the sky, then think. Captain loudly, "I have control." The first officer nods, reads the warning lights, but there are so many of them that his eyes just slide. The list of faults is longer than the time. They do not retract the landing gear, do not touch the flaps. Any change can destroy the balance. The plane is flying even though it shouldn't. It is unstable, tilted to the right, and the pilots feel the car sag in turns. On the ground, in the East Midlands control tower, the dispatcher on duty hears the roar of the turbines and sees on the radar how the plane's mark is suddenly gaining altitude. He understands that touch and go happened, but not according to plan. On the air, the first voice from the board. Yes, we have a touch. Touch the ground and request standby. The phrase is confusing haltingly, but everything is clear in it. Something went wrong. While the dispatcher requests help and suggests a new course, the pilots look at the fuel indicators. There are less than 3 tons left, and now they already know that the fog was not the worst enemy of this flight. The enemy is a combination of fatigue, chance, and a human second. The plane is in the sky again, but it no longer knows where to land. A story that began with a perfect ILS has turned into a situation where even working automation cannot compensate for the broken rhythm of people. Next, they will have a choice between airfields, between remaining fuel, and between hope and calculation. And, as always, between fire and water, when you need to act coolly and your heart is beating like a storm. After the impact, when the roar of engines cut through the sky over the East Midlands again, it seemed as if the air itself did not understand what had happened. The plane is flying, but it's flying wrong. The right plane is vibrating, the instruments are flashing red, my ears are ringing from overload, and only one sound remains constant. The hum of the turbines at the limit of power. Pilots don't say anything unnecessary. They have not yet had time to realize that they have managed to do something that should not be. Take off after touching the ground. The captain holds the helm with both hands. The left one controls, the right one slightly presses, compensating for the tendency of the aircraft to tilt to the right. In the panel, there are warnings one after another. HYD, a low pressure. Flap ASYM, gear unsafe. In translation, this means a loss of pressure in the hydraulic system, asymmetrical flaps, and a faulty landing gear. But behind these words lies a whole anatomy of damage. The hydraulic system, A, is the heart of the aircraft. She's responsible for controlling the brakes, flaps, reversals, and even the rudder. Having lost her, the crew seems to be flying with one hand. The flaps are now installed unevenly. The left wing has more lift than the right wing, and the aircraft tends to collapse. To align, the captain works with the pedals and rudder, as if balancing on tightrope. All this is against the background of vibration and the constant hum of alarms. The dispatcher asks, TNT 325, confirm go around? Pause. And then the tired, strained voice of the first officer. Yes, we have touched the ground. Request standby. The phrase sounds uncertain, but you can hear the main thing in it. They survived and keep the plane in the air. While the dispatchers are trying to figure out exactly what happened, the crew is counting the fuel. And then the moment comes when the usual arithmetic turns into a nightmare. Due to the released flaps and landing gear, due to the loss of aerodynamics, fuel consumption increases significantly. They lose kilogram after kilogram, like sand through their fingers. There are just over 3 tons left on board, about 30 minutes of flight. It's not just a limitation, it's a time sentence. The captain contacts the dispatcher and briefly informs. Mayday, aircraft damaged, low on fuel, gear unsafe. Now everything is official, an emergency situation. Everything changes instantly on the tower. The dispatcher notifies the services, the route is cleared of other aircraft, and the controller suggests the nearest option, Birmingham. There is excellent visibility, the sky is clear, and there is a strip with a full-fledged ILS system. In theory, this is an ideal option. But there is a problem. By lane 15 in Birmingham, the glide beacon is not working. This means that they can be guided along the course, but not in height. For a damaged aircraft with only one hydraulic system and an asymmetry of the flaps, it's a risk, almost like jumping with your eyes closed. The dispatcher explains. Runway 15, localizer only, glide path unserviceable. The captain is silent for a second. He understands that he can choose a short path and an increased risk, or a long approach to the opposite lane 33, where a full ILS is operating. A long way is 30 miles, which means more fuel. The short one is risky. There is silence inside the cabin, interrupted only by alarms and the monotonous sound of turbines. At such moments, decisions are not born, they happen. The captain makes a choice. A complete system is more important than economy. He says, Oui, LLTIC ILS 33. The dispatcher confirms and begins issuing vectors, short course directions. Turn right heading 220, descend to 3,000 feet, expect ILS runway 33. The plane slowly turns around, skirting the clouds. The vibration is increasing, and the right wing is shaking, but they continue to maintain altitude. After a couple of minutes, the dispatcher reports that the police are offering help. A helicopter is on duty nearby, ready to visually inspect them from below. This is a chance to understand what's wrong with the chassis. After all, there's uncertainty on the instruments. The indicator flashes between released and unclear. The captain agrees. The helicopter flies up from the left side. The pilots see only a glimmer of headlights somewhere below. In a moment on the air, observation, nose gear down, left gear down, right gear appears up. These words fall into the cabin like a load. There is no right rack. Now the scenario becomes clear. They have to land the plane on 2 pillars, the left and the nose, and the right side will inevitably collapse on the wing and engine. It won't just be a landing, it's a controlled glide on concrete, where everything depends on how gently you manage to lower the right side. The first officer is already opening the quick reference handbook, a thick folder with emergency procedures. finds the section landing gear malfunction, partial extension. According to the instructions, you need to 1. Switch the chassis lever to the off position. 2. Pull the emergency release handles. 3. Wait 15 seconds. 4. Return the lever to down. He does everything step by step. The indicators do not change. No green, no locking sound. The captain tries manually, pulls the lever, but the jerk is empty. At this point, they still don't know that the right rack has been left on the grass by the East Midland Strip for a long time. The dispatcher reports, "Fire brigade ready at Birmingham." The pilots briefly confirm. Now it's not just flying. It's a series of precise movements, like a surgeon who knows that his instrument is not perfect, but there is no other. The captain is heading for Birmingham. The remaining fuel is less than 3 tons, about 20 minutes. It's only enough for one run. There can be no mistake. Dawn is below. The fog is behind us, but now the fog is different. In our heads, in our reactions, in our bodies stretched like strings. The plane is flying unsteadily. The wing is shaking, but it is holding on. Every warning on the panel now sounds like a heartbeat. Flap ASIM. Gear unsafe. LOW fuel. 3 words, 3 factors, 3 pressure lines. And yet, they are moving towards a goal. Because that's the only vector left. Flying. As long as there is fuel and air under the wings. 10 minutes later, the dispatcher reports, 30 miles to touchdown. The captain answers briefly. Copy. Fire brigade standing by. Affirmative. All services are ready. Now, there's only one thing left. To make it. And here's the contrast again. On Earth, in Birmingham, everything is extremely calm. Morning lights, a flat strip, equipment is ready. There's a plane in the sky, flying with one leg in half. Wings held by the hands of 2 tired people. Then there will be a landing, the most accurate and the most dangerous in their lives. And it will show how fine the line is between order and chaos, between engineering and instinct, between survival and fall. By the time the Birmingham dispatcher last clarified, 30 miles to touchdown, the cabin has already turned into a space of pure concentration. All the worries, noises, and fatigue have now merged into one smooth, almost hypnotic background. This condition is called tunnel vision, when the whole world shrinks to the size of a dashboard and there are only course lines, numbers, and hands on the steering wheel. Everything else is fog, literally and metaphorically. Normally, the crew would just go to Liverpool, where visibility is perfect and the automation works without restrictions. But now theory has given way to practice. Liverpool is too far away. There is not enough fuel even for the second round. Every minute in the air is minus 100 kilograms, and they feel it physically like sand pouring out of their palms. The decision has been made, Birmingham. The closest thing is where there's a strip with an ILS system, albeit not perfect. But there is still a chance. The pilots are preparing for the approach. The first officer opens the emergency landing checklist when the landing gear is partially released. His voice trembles a little, but the intonation is honed, as if memorized. This is how it should be in aviation. When everything collapses, the voice should remain even. The captain listens, confirms every line. Their interaction is like a ritual. It's not just following instructions. It's a way to keep control of the chaos. The captain says, "We'll touch the left side of the runway. Keep it straight as long as we can." He knows that if you land in the center, then on impact, the right wing will immediately pull the plane sideways, and the fuselage may break off in a side slip. If you touch closer to the left edge, there will be at least a little room for maneuver, a few meters of concrete that can save. Now comes the phase when physics and psychology are intertwined. A damaged aircraft behaves unpredictably. The right wing has less lift, and the aircraft is constantly tilting to the right, requiring constant correction. Flap ASIM is lit on the dashboard. This inscription is like a verdict. Asymmetric flaps mean that with the slightest change in speed, the lifting force on each wing will be different. If you make a mistake with the traction, the car may collapse. But the captain is no novice. He knows what to do and keeps everything under control. His movements are precise, minimal. The first officer can only monitor the instruments, voicing the parameters. Speed 140, localizer alive, glide slope captured. The words sound almost mechanical, but it is precisely these mechanics that keep the plane in the sky. The dispatcher reports. Police helicopter confirms right gear up. Fire brigade standing by. Now everything is final. They are landing with one main landing gear and a nose rack. 2 points of support on a tricycle landing gear is like riding a bicycle without one pedal. The balance is maintained as long as there is movement, as long as everything is perfectly synchronized. Any distortion, and physics will take its toll. And so they enter the final approach course. A streak is already visible below, a thin silver line in the gap between the layers of clouds. That's all they need to see. The radio beacon is working, and the glide path is stable. The autopilot is no longer in use. The captain is driving manually. Every pedal movement, every micro movement of the steering wheel is the result of thousands of hours compressed into minutes. The first officer voices the data. 1,000 stable continue. 500 good approach. 200 flare armed. And then the hardest part begins. As they approach the runway, the captain sees its lights, a long, smooth, white path. He pulls the steering wheel, keeping the nose slightly higher than usual to prevent impact. The plane touches the left rack, gently, almost perfectly. The noise is muffled and steady. Everything is going according to plan. But after a second, the right side loses its footing and metal meets concrete. Roar, sparks, flame from friction. The right side of the plane descends onto the engine, and now the fuselage slides along the runway, throwing out a cascade of sparks. There's almost no control, but the captain holds the direction with the pedals, as if trying to turn a ton of steel with the effort of a single thought. There's a rumble in the cockpit, but the voice remains steady. Spoilers, not available, thrust idle, reverse left only. Only the left engine responds. The pilots hold the car while it glides like a giant lighted arrow. The dispatcher sees a fiery path stretching along the lane and gives the command to the firefighters to move. The plane slows down. 120, 100, 80, 40, and finally a stop. Silence. There is only the clink of metal, the pounding of a heart, and the slight crackle of cooling brakes. The captain breaks the silence first. Cut engines. The first officer turns the levers. The turbines are quieting down. All that remains in the cabin is a buzzing in the ears. 20 seconds later, firefighters rush up to the fuselage, flooding it with foam. Smoke is still billowing from under the right wing, but the flames are quickly extinguished. The crew remains in place. No words, just glances. They know they've done the impossible. This landing, despite all the chaos, turned out to be accurate to the meter. The plane remained on the runway. The crew was unharmed. All that worked was cold discipline and the inner force of habit. While the fire trucks roar outside, the echo of instruments and the whisper of the autopilot still rings inside the cabin, which could not save but gave a chance. And in this silence, where the smell of burning mixed with the smell of kerosene and hot metal, it becomes clear that sometimes survival is not about a miracle, but about how deeply the rule is sewn into you. Keep heading until there is silence. The next morning, when the sun had already risen over Birmingham, the concrete strip still bore the traces of a nightmare. A long dark streak from the engine, burnt foam, and fragments of metal fragments, which rescuers carefully collected one by one. The Boeing TNT Airways stood in the distance, lopsided, as if it didn't believe it was still intact. The right strut was missing, and the right wing console was slightly raised, as if in a mute attempt to maintain balance. From the outside, it looked like an exhausted car. But inside, in his systems, the entire chronology of what had happened was still stored. There are no secrets in the aviation world. Everything is written down. The black boxes have already been removed, and figures appear on the screens of the investigators, which will replace vague emotions with dry logic. And it is precisely in these figures that the paradox lies. Not a single device was mistaken. None of the systems provided false information. The automation was working flawlessly, as if it was trying to show until the last second that it wasn't making a mistake. She just followed the command she was given. The main mystery for the investigators is why the crew did not go on a second lap when the deviation along the glide path became noticeable. Why did the experienced captain continue to hold the automation instead of regaining control? The answer was not a malfunction, but a human perception. When technology does everything right, a person begins to believe in its infallibility. This is a phenomenon of cognitive trust. Pilots tend to believe that if automation is active, then the situation is under control. They watch their instruments more than their intuition. But automation doesn't think, it just executes the algorithm. And now the contrast. At the moment when the captain pressed the wrong button, the computer did not get confused. It did exactly what it should. It shut down. In cat-IA mode, where two autopilots operate synchronously, the failure of one leads to the blocking of the other. This is a built-in protection that eliminates conflict between control channels. Therefore, when the pilot tried to turn on both below 800 feet, the system refused to obey. This is not a failure. It is a prescribed procedure. And here's the paradox. The technique followed the procedure, and the person violated it, not realizing that he had already ceased to be a part of the system, but had become its external factor. On the investigator's screen, the descent line looks perfectly flat to a point of 500 feet. Then a slight upward tilt, then a sharp decrease. 1,500 feet per minute. 5 seconds, and touch the ground. From the point of view of mathematics, this is an insignificant amount of time. From a human point of view, it's an eternity filled with sounds, decisions, and instinct. The investigators are listening to the recording of the negotiations. The voices are even, almost calm. No screaming, no panic. Only short commands and clicking buttons. This is not a disaster movie. It's a quiet, compressed tragedy of professionalism. They did everything they were taught, but one random phrase on the air, one wrong click, one moment of doubt, and the whole system crumbled. TNT Airways has been under the scrutiny of the commission. Their internal procedures were correct. The crew went through all the training, and the captain met the requirements. But in the report of the British Air Accidents Investigation Branch, AIB, something appeared that is rarely written in plain text. The problem is not in the regulations. The problem is that the rules need to be lived, not just known. And this is the exact wording of the essence. Because any rule is like a seatbelt. It only works when it's fastened. The investigators separately note that the dispatcher's decision to transmit an inoperable message at the time of entry was erroneous. Even intonation matters. Any phrase unrelated to safety can distract the crew at a critical moment. A dry but important sentence appeared in the report. Controllers are advised to refrain from transmitting messages not related to flight safety after the 1,000-foot mark before touchdown. This rule will later become the standard for all British airports. When the commissions completed their analysis, they came to the conclusion that it was technically impossible to prevent such a situation. All systems worked correctly. The only thing that could save the flight was an instant departure for the second round. But this command did not sound. And here again, the contrast is technology is perfect, man is vulnerable. But it is precisely this vulnerability that makes flight possible. Because a machine knows how to execute, and a person knows how to solve. The captain acted the way he was used to: analyze, correct, control. But sometimes the best solution is not to fight, but to retreat. Call it toga, and you'll believe it. In fact, you can rethink everything here. But at that moment, the brain doesn't think in terms of tactics. It just wants to finish. And it was this desire to finish that became the most dangerous. When the investigation was completed, the plane was already at the repair site. The strut was replaced, the wing panel was replaced, and the hydraulic system was restored. He could fly again. The machine doesn't feel anything. Everything is just physics for it. But for those who were in the cockpit, this flight remained in the body forever. And if the technique is wrong without error, then we are wrong. But this is not a reason to abandon technology. This is a reminder. No automation can replace the human understanding that control is not a button. Control is awareness. Morning light filtered through the low English sky, making the runway look like a wet mirror. It was all over now, but there was still that tension in the air that comes after thunder. Technicians in bright vests walked around the accident site, measuring the tracks on the concrete. The length of the run was almost a kilometer. Nearby, on the lawn, they found what was missing, the right landing gear. She was lying on her side, neatly, as if she was just tired and decided to lie down. The investigators knew that this was where the very second that cost the crew almost everything ended. This second is not just a moment on the clock. This is the space between a decision and an action. The human factor lives in it, something that cannot be prescribed in the regulations. The captain wanted to clarify the landing clearance, but his brain, overloaded with fatigue and attention to the instruments, sent an impulse a little differently. Under stress, the body becomes autonomous. Fingers act faster than awareness. And so it happened. He pressed the wrong button. 1 second, and the automation turned off. But even up to that second, everything was going to her. Every choice is a piece of the puzzle. The decision to stay waiting, hoping that the fog will clear. Extra laps squeezed out of the fuel supply. Flipping through paper maps where the airport is hidden under a different name. Each of these steps seem like a small thing. But there are no small things in aviation. The whole system is built on the idea that any little thing can be decisive. In conclusion, the AIB suggested writing. The key factor is the accumulation of minor deviations, which individually did not pose a threat, but collectively formed a critical situation. This sounds like a diagnosis of not just one disaster, but of the whole human nature. We rarely fall from a single mistake. More often, it comes from a chain of small compromises made along the way. But there is a downside. The same seconds, the same microactions can also save. When the plane hit the ground and soared up again, the captain was not at a loss. His reaction is an instinct, but based on discipline. He pulled the car out of the fall, retained control, despite the loss of the hydraulic system. The first officer instantly checked the fuel and communications readings. And even after the blow, they spoke calmly, fulfilling the checklists. This is also the price of second, but with a plus sign. Aviation always lives between these poles. Impeccable technology and imperfect human perception. One world works by algorithm, the other by intuition. And when both worlds stop, they are born as such from history, as TNT 325 shows. As a result, the commission did not directly blame the pilots, engineers, or dispatchers. Everyone did their job within the acceptable limits. Nevertheless, the conclusion sounded almost philosophical. The aviation security system is based on human error, but it exists due to human flexibility. It was flexibility that saved the crew. She allowed the captain to improvise where the instructions ended. She allowed the first officer to act on the situation, not on the page. A car can perform a maneuver perfectly, but only a human can make a choice when there is no perfect option. Fatigue, pressure, a white fog in which the end of the strip is not visible. And yet, survival. That's what makes aviation special. This is an industry where tragedies become instructions and mistakes turn into knowledge. Every report, Every recording of radio conversations is not just an analysis, but a reminder to those who will be in the sky tomorrow that every second has a price. The cost of a mistake is almost fatal. The price of doing the right thing is life. In the evening of the same day, the captain and the first officer were sitting in the interrogation room. There's a dictaphone and a bottle of water on the table. The questions sounded gentle, but accurate. Why didn't you go to the second round? Why did they try to restore the autopilot? The captain replied quietly, because I thought I could take back control, because I wasn't sure what the message was for us. And it was an honest answer. Justification is a human recognition of how the brain narrows the world down to a single solution. After the investigation, both were allowed to continue their careers. They returned to flying after a few months. The car is repaired too. She took off and landed again as if nothing had happened. But for those who know this story, every landing now sounds different. For some reason, the TNT 325 version is not just a story about a technical self. This is a lesson about how delicate the balance between confidence and attention is, and that sometimes the fate of a flight is decided not by a loud event, but by a quiet click of a finger on the wrong button. The fog cleared by morning. Planes were flying over Birmingham again, and their silver trails against the background of the sun looked like lines of new hope. Each of them is a promise that someone at the top has taken into account the mistakes of those who have already been through the storm. Each landing is a symphony of movements, sounds, and numbers. And when everything goes according to plan, pilots act almost instinctively. But the closer you get to the ground, the more this symphony turns into a solo, where you can't make a mistake. The Boeing TNT 325 aircraft arrived from East Midlands International Airport. All the systems were working flawlessly, and the lights on the instruments were on smoothly, just like in the training video. The autopilots held their course synchronously, and the glide path deftly guided the plane down. At an altitude of 2,000 feet, the crew knew that touchdown was less than a minute away. Above them is a flat gray dome. Below them, nothing. No horizon, no landline, just gray and numbers. It's foggy outside, pure math inside. Tired bodies, strained nerves, but perfect order inside the system. All except one thing. The human brain, tired from hours without sleep. It is at such moments that the fine line between confidence and error becomes almost imperceptible. The captain checked the latest parameters. The speed is stable, the course is aligned, the autopilots are active. The first officer repeated the procedure, eyes darting between the scales. Everything went as in the textbook, and suddenly someone else's voice is on the air. TNT November 325, I have received instructions that you should not land here based on your operational authority. At your discretion, you can move around in a circle. The phrase, uttered in a calm tone, sounded like an ordinary bureaucratic formality. But in those seconds, she was like throwing a stone at perfectly tuned gears. The words "you are not to land" and "you may go around" are a contradiction in themselves. It's not a command or a ban, it's something in between. And in a cabin where every sound counts, such uncertainty sounds more dangerous than an alarm. The first officer did not fully grasp the meaning. English stress, noise, the brain chooses only keywords, not to land and go around. But without context, it's a collection of sounds. The captain understood more, but not everything. In such circumstances, the pilot always acts according to the principle: clarify before you act. He reached for the transmission button, the one on the control stick. A click, the wrong one. Instead of the radio button, his finger hit the next one, turning off the autopilot. A short, sharp signal is a disconnect warning, one of the most unpleasant sounds in the cabin. It means the automation is gone, you're left alone with the car. A moment of confusion. The second autopilot also falls off. The security system does not allow one channel to work alone in this mode. The green CMD-A-B indicator goes off on the screen. The plane, which was perfectly stable before, barely noticeably changes its tilt. Usually, the pilot just returns control manually, but in Cat 3 conditions, everything is more complicated. At 600 feet above the ground, even a slight tilt feels like a storm. The captain is trying to restore the system. He turns on the first channel, which activates, but the second one immediately goes out. He tries again, and the result is the same. The system will not accept double activation below 800 feet. She's protecting herself, but a person is trying to outsmart the logic that he himself created. While the captain is struggling with the panel, the first officer sees a subtle upward deviation on the glide path indicator, 1 high. He speaks briefly. 1 high, 0 reaction. Repeats, louder, in French. 1.0. Silence again. The captain is absorbed in the struggle with automation. Meanwhile, the plane begins to veer to the left of the axis. It's invisible to the eye, but it's critical for the devices. In conditions of limited visibility, even a deviation of several tens of meters is the difference between the lane and the field. The first officer is still monitoring the instruments, but hesitates to say the main phrase, "Go around." He knows that the captain is the senior. He has experience, and if he is not in charge, then it's not the time yet. This is the trap of hierarchy, when trust is stronger than instinct. In the cockpit, everything happens in seconds. The voice of the EGPWS system interrupts the tense silence. Terrain plus up. The captain looks up and sees a green fog in front of him. But it's not fog. This is Earth. He pulls the steering wheel towards himself, gives thrust to the maximum. The turbines are roaring, but physics doesn't have time. The plane hits the ground with its right wing. The landing gear brakes, and the hull shudders. The overload is almost 4G. The autopilot was turned off a moment before they touched, and now all that keeps them in the air are human hands. But Boeing is a tough car. It doesn't break, it bounces like a ball, gaining height again. The roar of the engines is like the cry of an animated beast. The first officer does not immediately realize that they are flying again. He shouts, "Go around, go around," but the captain is already doing it. Dozens of lights turn on in the cabin. Hide press a low, flap ASYM, gear unsafe, yell EV field diff press. They read these signals not with their eyes, but with their skin. One after the other like pulsating beats. The captain holds the plane, pulls it up, aligns it. My hands are shaking, but control returns. "I have control," he says finally. It's not just a formula. This is the moment when a person becomes stronger than a machine again. Nothing is visible from the outside. Inside, there is a complete chaos of devices. But they're alive, and the plane is alive. Now, they need to decide where to go. Return to East Midlands is not possible. The damage is too serious. The dispatcher sees a mark on the radar, hears a trembling voice on the air, and realizes they didn't just go to the second round. They just came back from over the line. He asks, "TNT 325, confirm you are airborne?" "Affirmative, we have touched ground, stand by." And this phrase, spoken in a tired voice, comes as a shock to everyone on the air. The plane that just landed is back in the air, damaged with one hydraulic system, without the right landing gear, but flying. There are only 2 people on board, but at this moment, it seems as if the whole world is watching them. And no one knows if they will have enough fuel now, whether they will be able to touch the ground again. They're flying, but they're no longer on autopilot. Now it's just a man, just precision, breathing rhythm, and hands on the steering wheel. One button, 1 second, and the sky has once again become the most dangerous place on Earth. The height is 600 feet. The strip is still invisible, but every millimeter of the way has already been measured by instruments. The pilots see nothing but instruments, numbers, and running dials on the screens. Behind the glass is a dense white wall that can neither be overtaken nor read. Only trust in technology and in your own hands. There is now a special silence in the cabin, the kind that happens before an explosion of energy. Outside, there is the hum of turbines. Inside, there is a pulse synchronized with the signals of the systems. The machine gun is no longer with them. The pilots fly the plane manually. This means one thing. Every fraction of a second must be accurate. Perfect. 500 feet. The system says in a mechanical voice. 500. The first officer repeats aloud. A familiar echo, a ritual that preserves concentration. At this moment, the captain catches the glide path manually. His gaze jumps between the indicators. Everything seems normal, but this normal is already an illusion. The plane does not follow the line, but barely noticeably drifts above the glide path. One delicate angle and the trajectory changes. In a clear sky, such a mistake is easy to fix. In the fog, this is equivalent to driving blindfolded across a narrow bridge. 450 feet, the thin howl of the warning system. Then the voice of EGPWS, sync rate. The rate of decline is slightly higher than normal, but not critical. The captain compensates with thrust, try to maintain a stable speed. 400 feet, all the attention is in the center of the panel. Localizer deviation. The course goes to the left. The captain shifts the steering wheel slightly to the right, but the reaction of the aircraft is not symmetrical. The damaged hydraulic circuit makes the response sluggish. 350 feet. The second EGPWS signal appears. Terrain. The first officer instantly tenses up. His brain says go away, but the body doesn't move. He waits for the captain's command, as he was taught. 300 feet. The system's voice is already louder. Pull up. At that moment, the captain looks up, and for the first time in several minutes, he sees not numbers, but color. Not white fog, not appliances, but dense greenery. Earth. Second, he pulls the steering wheel towards himself and gives thrust to the maximum. The engines roared as if waking up, but the air does not forgive delays. Ground contact is 150 knots, almost 280 kilometers per hour. A blow is not like a collision, but like a short sigh. The body is thrown forward, the straps cut into the shoulders. The right rack breaks instantly like a splinter. The wing on the right side settles, the fuselage touches the ground. Rumble is not just a sound. It is a physical sensation when metal and earth meet. Everything happens in a split second, but for the crew, it's like a slow motion film. The sounds merge. The roar of turbines, the crackle of metal, the screech of flaps. The captain pulls the steering wheel, tries to straighten out. The left wing rises. The plane straightens up again. The turbines are running at maximum, and the Boeing is bursting upward, as if physics itself has changed its mind. They're in the sky again. The first officer is silent, just the breathing and the shaking of the steering wheel. The captain says, "Go around. I have control." Now everything is on edge. The right wing vibrates. Hydraulics is lost. The pressure needle has dropped to 0. This means that the spoilers, the right reversing system, and part of the brakes are not working. The flaps are stuck in an unbalanced position. The speed drops. The plane tries to go to the right. The captain pedals, compensates for the roll, as if his hands are glued to the steering wheel. There is a whole scattering of signals on the panel. Gear unsafe. HYD press a low. Flap asim. A lev field diff press. Each of them requires a separate procedure. But that's not the time right now. There's only one rule right now. Keep the plane in the sky. The dispatcher, watching on the radar, does not believe his own eyes. On the screen, the plane's mark, which was landing a second ago, is gaining altitude again. He transmits, "TNT 325, confirm you're going around?" From the cockpit with a pause. "Affirmative. We have touched and request standby." The phrase sounds uneven, haltingly, and it feels like they didn't just go to the second round. They've just survived a collision, lost their footing, and are flying again. The captain quickly assesses the situation. The fuel pressure is normal, the engines are stable, but the consumption has increased. The resistance is huge. They don't remove the landing gear. It's dangerous. If they don't touch the flaps, you can lose control. The plane seems to be hanging between life and failure, but still holding on. Inside the cabin, there is a smell of burnt metal, warm kerosene, and fear, which is not mentioned out loud. The first officer opens the emergency instructions, flips through the pages, but his fingers are shaking. The captain looks at him briefly. Forget checklist. Just fly. He knows that sometimes the right thing to do is just stay in the sky. The dispatcher suggests that they go north to Birmingham. The weather is clear there, and the lane is long. The captain nods, heading to Birmingham. Declare emergency. Now they are officially an emergency flight. All the services on Earth are already waiting. But there are new problems ahead. Damaged flaps, an unbalanced thrust, one reverse, and a lost strut. It's all a set of physical incompatibilities, and they stick anyway. The board behaves like a living organism, wounded but clinging to the air. The captain squeezes the steering wheel so that his knuckles turn white. The first officer looks at the fuel consumption, less than 3 tons. A 30-minute flight. 30 minutes to find a way to get back to Earth and not crash a second time. And here, in this shaky silence between heaven and Earth, they realize for the first time. This is not a fight against technology. It's a struggle with time. The plane is back in the sky, but this is no longer the same resilient, confident Boeing that took off from Leach. Now it's a tortured steel bird that flies not because of aerodynamics, but in spite of it. The injuries changed her behavior the way an injury changes a person's gait. She flies, but every movement requires effort. The captain holds the helm with both hands. His muscles are tense, as if he is trying to hold the car by willpower. The right hand constantly corrects the roll. The right wing console is damaged. The flaps are stuck in an asymmetrical position. Now the left wing gives a little more lift, and the plane is constantly pulling to the right. To balance, the captain holds the pedal of the left rudder, as if he is pressing on the brake, without releasing it for a second. The first officer looks at a panel littered with warning lights. Flappy SWAM. High press a low. Gear unsafe. RELEV field diff press. These phrases are not just words. They're like diagnoses on a monitor in intensive care. Hydraulic system A is lost. This means that the right side of the flap controls, brakes, spoilers, and part of the rudders no longer obey. The controls are now partly mechanical, partly on a backup system. The car is heavy and unstable. It's morning outside. The fog is receding, and the gray sky is turning into streaks of blue. There are fields and small towns below. For the crew, this is not a view of beauty, but of accountability. The closer to the ground, the less time there is. The dispatcher asks, TNT 325, what are your intentions? Pause. The captain answers calmly, almost matter-of-factly. We are damaged. Request nearest airfield with ILS and clear weather. Someone can be heard transmitting data on the other end of the broadcast. A second later, the dispatcher responds, Birmingham available. Runway 33, full ILS, visibility good. These words sound like a promise of salvation. But the captain understands that the journey to Birmingham is not just 30 miles. That's 30 miles on an airplane where one landing gear won't retract, the flaps are skewed, and fuel consumption is increasing every minute. He asked for confirmation. Fire services on standby? Affirmative, all units ready. The pilots exchange glances. A short glance without words. It's all settled. Birmingham is their last chance. The first officer takes the fuel calculation. The figures are disappointing, just under 3 tons. This is enough for about 25 to 30 minutes. They can't afford a second round. They cannot allow a single mistake. Everything should be perfect, but there is no ideal on a damaged car. The captain gives short instructions. Don't touch the flaps. Don't remove the landing gear. Don't change the configuration. let fly as it is. He knows that any change can cause destruction. Now, everything is based on a balance of pressure, remnants of hydraulics, and intuition. The plane is shaking. The vibration increases. The right wing seems to be trying to escape from the stream. The sound of the turbines became uneven, and there was a low hum in my ears. But the height is stable, 3,000 feet. The speed is 160 knots. The dispatcher transmits the new coordinates. Turn right heading 230, you're 30 miles from touchdown. The first officer repeats the course, writes in the log, but his fingers are shaking. They were both tired to the limit, not physically, but mentally. The brain runs on the remnants of adrenaline. The captain says curtly, "Don't look at the alarms. Look at the course line." Pilots know that if at some point you stop looking at the horizon, it's all over. After a few minutes, the connection comes alive again. TNT 325, do you carry dangerous cargo? Pause. The first officer searches for documents, looks at the manifest sheet. Affirmative, pyrotechnics on board. The dispatcher does not respond immediately, and then he speaks softly but clearly. Understood. Fire services will be prepared accordingly. Pyrotechnics. This means that there's a risk of detonation in case of impact or fire. Now, even a soft landing should be without a single spark. The captain doesn't talk about it. He just grips the steering wheel harder. He doesn't need more information. He has only one task: to make it through. At this point, a proposal is received. A police helicopter can inspect the landing gear visually. The captain agrees. After a few minutes, they see a small spot with flashing lights below. "We have visual on you," says the voice from the helicopter. A few seconds of silence. Nose gear down, left main down, right gear appears up. These words sound calm, but for the crew, it's like a verdict. The right rack is missing. Now everything is very clear. You will have to sit on two supports, and the right side will inevitably fall on the engine and wing. All that can be done is to choose the angle so that the impact is as soft as possible and so that the plane does not go sideways. The first officer opens the quick reference handbook, reads the partial landing gear release procedure, and performs the steps. Lever down. Pause. No effect whatsoever. He tries again. To no avail. The captain doesn't waste time. He has already accepted reality. The right stance is lost. The plane goes on course 33. The remaining fuel is just over 2 tons. This is enough for exactly one run. The captain repeats into the microphone. "We'll land on left gear. Request fire services along runway." Affirmative, the dispatcher responds. And now the countdown begins. 30 miles. 20. 15. There is almost silence in the cabin. All alarms are disabled. Everything superfluous is turned off. Just thrust, steering, and breathing. The first officer reads the final checklist. Fuel pumps on. Landing gear, as is. Flaps hold. Speed, 140 knots. Every line sounds like a last prayer. The strip is already visible from the outside, a thin silver line among the green fields. The captain checks the course, sets the angle of descent, and says softly, "Now, there's no room for error." The last 15 miles. The plane is already on the glide path. The course is aligned along the axis of lane 33. Everything around is motionless. Even the air seems frozen. Only the instruments are alive. The numbers are running, the hands are shaking, the signals are beeping. But there is silence in the cabin, the one in which you can hear how the stretched metal creaks under load. The captain holds the steering wheel slightly to the left of the center, compensating for the constant tendency of the aircraft to fall on the right wing. My muscles feel like lead. His gaze is on the aiming point of the strip, to where the touch should be. He knows that there won't be a perfect landing. It cannot be perfect when one side of the aircraft is unsupported. The first officer reads the parameters. 1,000 feet, stable. Glide slope captured. Speed, 140 knots. A voice without emotion. as if it were a memorized text. But this is not a mechanic. It's a way to prevent panic from getting inside. At an altitude of 800 feet, the dispatcher reports, runway 33 clear, wind calm, fire brigade in position. The captain answers briefly, Roger, continuing approach. Fire trucks are already parked along the strip. Their flashing lights turn the wet concrete red and blue, like the pulsating heartbeat of the earth. People in hard hats are watching a dot on the horizon. It is almost invisible, only the flashes of navigation lights, appearing and disappearing in the morning fog. 500 feet. 500. Stable. The first officer replies. 400. Approach lights in sight. The first lights of the strip appear through the gray veil. They twinkle like life-saving beacons. 300. Visual contact confirmed. Now, the captain sees the contours of the strip, a silver ribbon stretching into infinity. He aligns the plane slightly to the left of the center, in case it is pulled to the right upon impact. 200 feet. Silence. Even the system doesn't talk anymore. Only the low hum of the turbines and the slight crackling of the casing. 100 feet. The captain pulls the wheel smoothly, as if he's holding his breath instead of the car. The speed is 135 knots. All attention is on the horizon line. 50 feet. Retard, says the traction control, offering to reduce the speed. But the captain leaves the thrust just above the minimum so that the right side does not fail too early. 20 feet. The wings are almost parallel to the ground. There is a ringing silence in the cabin. 10. Touch. The left stance takes the kick first. The shock absorbers sag, and the fuselage tilts slightly to the right. At the same moment, the right side meets the concrete. Metal screams. The sound is like a sheet of steel being torn apart. Sparks scatter onto the engine. The plane begins to glide, leaving behind a long trail that looks like a scar on the surface of the runway. The captain presses the pedals, holding the course. The right engine touches the ground and becomes a support, but not for long. He rubs the concrete, striking fire. The smell of hot kerosene instantly fills the air. The first officer shouts, "Left reverse only." The captain turns on the reverse of the left engine. The car rushes to slow down, but the asymmetric thrust drags it to the right. He's counterpedaling, fighting for a straight line. Firefighters see the plane rushing along the runway. The right wing is burning with sparks. Streams of smoke and dust escape from under the fuselage. 120 knots. 90. 60. The captain holds the course until the end. The wheels squeal, the wing cracks, but the fuselage remains on the runway. The speed is dropping. 40. 20. 10. Stop. The roar subsides. All that remains is the crackle of metal and the steady breathing of two people who are still holding the controls. The captain is the first to break the silence. Cut engines. The first officer moves the levers, the turbines stall, and with them comes a strange silence, almost sacred. The hum of fire trucks can be heard outside. Foam covers the wing and engine, extinguishes the last sparkles. The cabin doors remain closed. The crew is not moving. Only after a few seconds, the captain says, "We're on the ground." This phrase sounds not like a statement, but like a revelation. At the tower, the dispatcher exhales. The call signs TNT 325 are no longer in the headphones. Just a short message. Aircraft stopped. No fire. And in that silence, Birmingham seems to start breathing again. There is a trace on the strip, a long black stripe with burnt areas. There are fragments of a rack, a torn hatch, and several rivets on the side. But the fuselage is intact. The cabin is undamaged. And most importantly, both pilots are alive. When they go outside, they are greeted by floodlights, the sound of fire hoses, and the pungent smell of foam. The captain goes first. The steps are uneven, but steady. He stops, turns back to the plane. The right wing is down, the skin is charred, The engine is scratched, but it's standing. Is worth. The first officer says quietly, "We did it." The captain looks at him and just nods. And somewhere out there, in the sky, from where they just escaped, there remains a void. A place where human decision and mechanical precision converged in an instant, and miraculously did not destroy each other. The first thing they felt was the smell. Not smoke or fumes, but the heavy, oily aroma of heated metal mixed with foam. The air in the cabin was warm, humid, and thick. Everything seemed to be trembling with tension, which had not yet had time to dissipate. The turbine stopped, but the vibration in the body remained. The captain's hands were still gripping the steering wheel, even though the engines had been shut down for a long time. There was a rumble outside. It's not a roar, but rather the polyphonic hum of life that has burst back into the place where silence reigned a moment ago. Fire trucks were moving along the runway. Hoses were shooting jets of foam, and rescuers in yellow helmets were running to the nose of the plane, as if their every move could still make a difference. A faint emergency power signal rang in the cockpit, the last echo of the system, like a reminder. The plane was alive but tired. The captain finally lets go of the wheel. His palms are sticky, and there are belt marks on his wrists. He takes a deep breath and says softly, "Flaps, leave as is. No hydraulics." The first officer nods. His voice is shaking, but he's also sticking to the routine. Checks the fuel taps, de-energizes the main tires, and turns off the batteries. Every move is like a step back to reality. Foam could be seen outside the window, thick and shiny like snow. Flashing lights flicker in her reflection. Silhouettes of people pass through it. Someone is waving their hands. Someone is checking the engine temperature. Someone just stands there, as if not believing that in front of them is not ruins, but an airplane that miraculously remained intact. The tower dispatcher reports on the air. TNT 325, emergency services are in position. Confirm crew status. The first officer answers, his voice hoarse, as if through sand. Crew safe. Aircraft secure. At these words, someone applauds in the tower. Not loudly, but spontaneously, just because they know it could have ended differently. Firefighters beat the fuselage with their fist, a sign that everything is in order. You can get out. The captain opens the escape hatch. Cold air blows into my face. It smells of fuel, wet concrete, and relief. From that moment on, they're no longer in the sky. They are part of the earth again. When the captain goes outside, his eyes don't see anything at first. It's too bright. He raises his hand, shielding himself from the searchlights, and only then notices his plane. The right side is lowered to the ground. The skin is cut like claws. The engine is damaged, but not on fire. The left chassis still weighs 50 tons, and it seems that it groans under this load. But the car held out. He walks along the fuselage, stepping on wet concrete. Each of his movements is accompanied by a short squelch of foam under his boots. The first officer is being led by rescuers, who are helping to remove his headphones and unfasten his seatbelts. He's still holding a notebook with fuel calculations in his hands. The fingers are white, as if made of wax. They turn around and see the trail that the plane left. Long, black with metallic flecks. It's not just a braking distance. It's the story of their entire night, written on concrete. From the first spark to the last meter. The medic comes closer and checks for a pulse. The captain grins. "We're alive. Just give me some water." The voice is hoarse, but there is relief in it, almost irony. A few minutes later, they're sitting in an ambulance van. They're covered with a thermal film, not from the cold, but to knock down the shivers that do not go away. For the first time all night, they don't talk about the plane, they don't look at the instruments. They just don't say anything. Outside, the equipment continues to work. The fuel valves are shut off, the casing is being cooled, and firefighters are checking temperature sensors. The emergency team collects the fragments of the rack that were left behind. In the spotlight, The metal glitters as if nothing had happened. At the tower, the dispatcher reports to London. Emergency landing completed. Crew safe. Aircraft damaged, but stable. The phrase sounds dry and official, but behind it is a story about precision, instinct, and luck. The captain looks out the window of the van. The outline of the plane is still visible behind the glass. He says softly, "We held on until the very end." The first officer turns to him and smiles for the first time. "And now we have land again." They both fall silent. In the distance, another plane can be heard taking off over the airport. The morning flight, already on schedule. The sky is living its normal life again. And in this silence, amidst foam, light, and the smell of metal, there's a feeling of something great and simple. The Earth can really be a salvation. It's only been a few days. But for those who survived that night, time was divided into before and after. There's a black box on the investigator's London desk, a small rectangle burned out at the edges, in which the last seconds of that flight are hidden. It's heavy, as if it stores not just data, but the very air from the cabin, the smell of foam, the sound of cracking metal, and a voice said at a height of several hundred feet. "Go around. I have control." The decryption room is cold and quiet. 3 people are sitting at monitors. On the screen, there are running waves of audio, behind each of which a word is hidden. The time is 4 hours, 43 minutes, and 2 seconds. One of them says, and starts recording. Noise. Clicks voices. 1 high. Pause. 1. Silence. Then a sharp beep. The autopilot is off. They listen every second over and over again. Not because they don't understand, but because they're looking for the moment when everything could still be saved. It's always there. You just need to hear it between the words. This is followed by the EGPWS soundtrack, Terrain, Pull Up, and almost simultaneously, the roar of engines. Then, a short blow, distortion crackle, and the sound of pulling again. They're taking off. The investigator stops recording and slowly says, "They managed 0.8 seconds before the full collision. Less than a second between the signal and the reaction. At a speed of 250 kilometers per hour, this is only a few tens of meters." The technical part of the investigation is running in parallel. Engineers remove the panels, open the wing sections, and study the hydraulic system. Their conclusion is dry. Everything worked by design. The right landing gear broke out at the fuse pin point, a specially weakened area created so that the wing would not collapse upon a hard impact. The aircraft has fulfilled its task. It has preserved its structure. Ironically, the equipment did everything right. But in aviation, right does not mean enough. Psychologists involved in the investigation are studying the transcript. For them, it's not numbers that matter, but intonation. When the captain says, "I have control," his voice is firm, but there is fatigue in it, the same timbre that appears on the verge of exhaustion. They note, at the time of the crisis, the crew did not allow panic. All commands are short, standard, and emotionless. But this, according to experts, played against them. Automatism replaced instinct. They acted according to the rules, but not according to the situation, explains one of the experts. They were waiting for a clear reason to leave, and in such cases, time is the only reason. The words human factors, workload, fatigue appear on the pages of the report. Overload, sleep cycle disruption. Officially, the crew had a legitimate rest before departure. But reality is not a clock, but a physiology. The captain slept during the day at an unnatural time for the body and was awake for the 10th hour. The first officer is almost the same age. Their brains worked in the phase of the circadian minimum, when the reaction rate drops and mistakes become unconscious. That's when a person believes in technology the most. Because technology doesn't get tired. It became a trap. Engineers are reviewing autopilot parameters. Everything is normal. He blacked out because the captain pressed the wrong button. And this is where the philosophy of aviation begins. where the error ends and the system begins. If the automation reacted strictly according to the algorithm, and the person did not understand what had happened, who was mistaken? One of the investigators says quietly, "It was a perfect storm. Small assumptions, tired decisions, and one wrong click." The colleague replies, "But it was the person who pulled them up later." Both are silent. Everything is in this silence. The AIB prepares the final report. His tongue is as cold as a surgical instrument. But life can be read between the lines. The plane was serviceable. The systems were functioning within normal limits. The crew's mistake was trying to restore automatic control below the minimum altitude and not initiating a second lap when deviating from the glide path. Then comes the conclusion, which is later quoted in dozens of training sessions. Flight safety depends not on the perfection of technology, but on how much the crew is willing to admit that technology can make mistakes with it. After the report is published, TNT Airways gathers all the crews. The instructor turns on the recording of radio conversations. The hall is quiet. There is a sound wave on the screen and a time code below it. He says, "It's not anyone's fault. It's a reminder." When the automation is silent and it seems that everything is under control, that's when you need to ask yourself the question, do I really feel the plane? The pilots are listening. Someone nods. Someone just looks at the floor. Everyone understands that the TNT 325 story is not an exception, but a warning. Meanwhile, the plane itself has been restored. New strut, new wing, repainted fuselage. A few months later, he takes to the air again. The machine has no memory. But the name of the flight, November 325, now lives on the list of those cases that teach flying better than any textbook. In the report, the last line sounds almost poetic. The crew acted to the end. Their decisions, even erroneous ones, were dictated by the desire to maintain control. And this aspiration saved lives. And beyond the protocols, where the numbers end, there remains silence. The silence in which the lesson sounds, not recorded in the documents. Aviation is not a victory over a mistake, but the art of continuing to fly, even when everyone is against it. After any incident, there is not a trace in the sky, but an echo. It is not visible, but it sounds for a long time in walkie-talkies, in the voices of instructors, in the quiet conversations of pilots before departure. TNT Flight 325 became just such an echo. Neither tragedy nor heroism in the usual sense. Just two human lives that faced the limit of their abilities and did not give up. Since then, when pilots are trained on simulators, they're increasingly given a scenario called the East Midland scenario. On the simulator screen, there is a gray sky, loss of hydraulics, failure of automation, vague instructions from the dispatcher. And every cadet going through this episode knows this is not a hypothetical situation. This is a story where a mistake is not the end. The instructors explain the system is not the enemy, but you can't completely transfer trust to her. Even if the instruments are calm, a person must think, feel, and anticipate. This is the meaning of the expression that has since entered the internal jargon of TNT Airways: fly the airplane. Don't watch the instruments, don't wait for confirmation, but just fly yourself. Airline psychologists are now adding special fatigue recognition modules to the training program. The simulators simulate not only system failures, but also cognitive distortions, delayed reaction, tunnel attention, and the effect of not noticing. It turns out that the danger is not that a person makes mistakes. The danger is that he's sure there's no reason to be wrong. After this incident, air traffic controllers also received new regulations. The instructions included a simple phrase: no non-safety messages below 1,000 feet. This is a dry formulation, but behind it is the story of the very phrase uttered at the wrong time and the very finger that made the wrong button. Now, every word spoken on the air is weighed. There are no superfluous lines in the sky. And yet the main changes did not take place in the papers. They're in people. Pilots who have heard this story are now telling it to young crews not as an incident, but as an example. When the automation is silent, remember the 325th. When in doubt, go to the second round. When you're tired, trust your instinct, not your instruments. It sounds simple, but behind this simplicity there are kilometers of nerves, broken hydraulic systems, and seconds stretched out of time. In the world of aviation, such cases become invisible teachers. They don't hang on posters, they don't sound in advertisements, but they live in every takeoff. Every button, every checklist, every security algorithm is someone's story, someone's almost. Sometimes engineers, working at night in hangars, joke, airplanes are books written in metal. Each has its own plot, its own chapters, its own characters. TNT 325 has a story about how a man made a mistake but did not give up, how the technique failed according to the algorithm, and the person survived by intuition, how a few seconds became a lesson for decades. Today, the same Boeing is flying under a different number. He transports cargo across Europe, entering the same airports where his name once sounded on the air like an alarm. None of the new pilots may even know his past. But somewhere in the cabin, in the faint hum of instruments, in the sound of old switches, there seems to be an echo of that night. When the next flight passes over the East Midlands in the morning, the sun reflects off the wing, and for a moment, it seems that the sky knows for itself. This plane has already passed through a storm. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear what the captain once said, looking at the panel where everything was flashing red. I have control. This is a phrase that has now become not just a report symbol. In a world where machines are increasingly trusted, she reminds us that humans are still needed, because heaven listens to those who hear it in response. Months have passed. The plane had been back in service for a long time, but in the air, in the cabins, in conversations between flights, the same echo still sounded dull, insistent, as if left after thunder. The TNT 325 flight was not just an accident, but a turning point in the perception of automation. For decades, the industry has been moving towards an ideal sky, one where people manage less and more systems. Autopilots, auto traction, automatic landing. All this was based on faith in the accuracy of the machines. But now engineers and psychologists were asking an uncomfortable question together. What if the danger is not in a technical error, but in the fact that a person ceases to feel flying? After the investigation, new terms appeared in the reports of the ICAO, EASA, and FAA. Automation compliance, mode confusion, over-reliance. They could be translated simply as complacency from automation. This has become the central concept of dozens of trainings. Instructors began to teach pilots not to trust the systems, but to understand how they think. Now, simulators have simulated situations where automation works flawlessly, but at the same time leads the aircraft to danger if a person does not intervene. It was a new philosophy. Everything is under control does not mean that it is safe. The human-machine interface has been discussed at engineering conferences. There were talks about how to make the devices not just accurate, but humane, so that the alarm system would not frighten, but help. The concepts of smart warnings have emerged, where the system does not just yell, "pull up," but suggests what exactly went wrong. On-board computers have begun to integrate contextual analysis algorithms to understand the condition of the aircraft and crew. But all this is later. First, there were the pilots. Those who read the TNT 325 report were talking among themselves. He pressed the wrong button, but it could have been any of us. And these words are not an excuse, but an awareness of fragility. Everyone who flew at night in the fog, who held the plane after a long shift, knew how easy it is to confuse two buttons when the mind is working at its limit. Special training sessions, manual proficiency under fatigue, manual flights for fatigue, have begun to be introduced in training centers. Now, every captain is required to perform a series of landings every 6 months without an autopilot. Ironically, it was thanks to this accident that they began to teach flying with their hands again, not with buttons. Airline offices have revised duty regulations. Now night flights alternate with daytime flights, and the minimum rest time has been increased. That's because 4:30 a.m. is the peak of the biological failure, the very moment when the brain is able to confuse the radio with the autopilot. The dispatching services have also changed. Now, any dispatcher is required to take a course in human factors, the psychology of fatigue, and cognitive perception. There are fewer words and fewer emotions on the air. Every phrase has weight now, because one careless remark almost cost your life once. And engineers working in hangars sometimes stop near that very aircraft. Its right wing has been repaired a long time ago. The new aluminum shines cleaner than the old one. But if you look closely, there's a small label on one of the inner panels. 325N survived. Unofficially, just as a keepsake. And yet the strongest echo of this flight is in the minds of those who take the helm. They know that automation is a friend, but not a savior. She can stay the course, but she is not able to make a decision. She knows how to count, but she doesn't feel when something is wrong. Now, before each approach, when the pilots check the control charts, there's one new phrase among the standard phrases. Unofficial, but often spoken aloud. If in doubt, fly it yourself. If in doubt, lead yourself. This simple thought has become a philosophy of a new era of flight. She's not talking about distrust of technology, but about taking back responsibility. That there is no perfect system in the sky, because its heart is a human being. And when the next night flight lands in a light fog at an altitude of 500 feet, the system's voice turns on. 500. The first officer repeats as taught. But now, somewhere deep inside, each of them hears a different one, a quiet but distinct reminder. Don't let go of control. Heaven listens to those who remember this lesson. And therefore, each echo of it is not fear, but gratitude. Because as long as a person is still holding the helm, even the automatic sky remains alive. When it's over, there are no sounds left. No sirens, no radio traffic, no rumbling engines. Only silence, such that you can hear your own breathing. And in this silence, the sky becomes just the sky again. Without fear, without reports, without the phrases go around. For the crew of the TNT 325, this silence did not come immediately. I had to earn it. It took them a long time to return to their regular flights after that night. Not out of fear, but out of awareness. After all, once you saw the Earth approaching through the green glow of the instruments, you never treat it as something distant anymore. At first, the captain, sitting in the chair, touched the autopilot button a little longer than necessary. I was checking to see if the light indicator would flicker or if the lamp would blink. Not because he didn't trust the machine, but because he now knew that even precision was frail. The first officer, on the contrary, became quieter. He began to listen, not to the radio, not to the system, but to the breathing of the cabin. There is a special condition in aviation, the sound of flight. It cannot be recorded, but you can feel it, a slight tension in the air, the vibration of the chair, the barely noticeable creak of the flaps. All this tells the pilot that the plane is alive. And since then, he trusted that sound, not just the numbers on the panel. They both knew that heaven does not forgive overconfidence, but sometimes it gives you one chance. And this chance may be unfortunate in form, but correct in essence. After all, they survived not because they did everything flawlessly, but because they did not stop acting. Even when everything was falling apart, even when automation was arguing with reality. Sometimes after a shift, already in the resting hangar, the captain would approach the planes and just look at their noses. He spoke in a low voice. You must always believe that you can get out, even when it seems like it's not. These words are not for the plane, but for myself. and for those who will someday be in his place. And in the training centers, there's now a picture on the wall, a Boeing 737 parked on a strip in Birmingham, surrounded by foam and firefighters. There's a small sign under the photo. Every mistake is a message. Listen carefully. Every mistake is a message. Listen carefully. This story has not become a big sensation. She wasn't on the news, but she remained in the system, in codes, in standards, in procedures, in the memory of those who fly. Every new pilot, studying the instructions, involuntarily follows in the footsteps of the 325th, in the lines about minimum altitudes, in the rules of radio communication, in the instructor's quiet reminders before the flight. And when another cargo flight flies over England at night, the lights of its navigation are reflected in the clouds. Somewhere below is the East Midlands, the very airfield where everything once hung on the edge. Pilots pass by, unaware that below them is a place where once two human errors converged with millions of precise calculations and still did not defeat a human. This story is not about a disaster. It's about what it means to be alive in the world of machines, about how easy it is to lose control and how difficult it is to regain it. That even when the instruments are silent, the sky still hears those who believe in themselves. And therefore, when the last engine turns off after landing and the cabin is plunged into silence, there's only one feeling left: deep, heavy, but bright. Silence after thunder is not the end. This is proof that life is still going on.